You know what nobody tells you about compromises? They're supposed to be about finding a middle ground, a solution where everyone gets a little of what they want. But sometimes, a compromise is just a beautifully wrapped trap, a decision you make thinking you're being clever, only to find out years later that you were the only one who gave anything up. I'm 31 now, and I just learned the hard way that my ex-husband, Alistair, was playing a game with rules I never even bothered to read. 10 years, 10 long years, I thought I was the one in control. I thought I had it all figured out, a stable marriage to a respectable man who championed my career, parents who, after a lifetime of criticism, finally showered me with approval. And Jasper was still in my life, a warm secret current running beneath the placid surface of my public one. I had my cake, and I was eating it too, slice by glorious slice, and in the arrogance of my youth, I thought I deserved every last crumb. It all started, as most of my life's biggest problems did, with my parents. Back in college, their ultimatum felt less like guidance and more like a declaration of war. I'd been with Jasper since we were 16, two halves of a whole, finishing each other's sentences and dreaming of a future filled with art, travel, and not much of a plan. We understood each other with a silent, intuitive language that Alistair and I would never, in a decade of marriage, come close to speaking. But my parents despised him. To them, Jasper was going nowhere, a charming distraction, a painter with dreams that couldn't pay a mortgage. He was, in their words, a waste of my potential. The threat was simple and brutal: end it with Jasper, or they'd cut me off. The trust fund my grandfather had established, the one that was supposed to secure my future, would be locked away until I made a sensible choice. I was 21, and the thought of losing everything, the financial safety net, their approval, the very foundation of my comfortable existence for a boy, even the boy I was sure was the love of my life, felt like a risk I couldn't afford to take. So, I did what I had to do. I compromised. 3 months after their ultimatum, my world still gray and muted without Jasper officially in it, I met Alistair. A friend of a friend, he was everything my parents could have designed in a lab. He was studying finance at Wharton, came from a family with a name that opened doors, and he dressed in tailored suits that spoke of ambition and stability. Most importantly, my parents adored him on sight. He was polite, he listened intently when my father talked about the stock market, and he looked at me with an admiration that felt safe, if not thrilling. The thing is, Jasper and I never really broke up. We just went underground. Our love became a secret society of two. My parents saw my new relationship with Alistair and breathed a sigh of relief. Alistair thought he was winning the heart of a girl who had chosen him above all others. And I, in my desperate attempt to please everyone, believed I was being strategic. I was keeping the best of both worlds, the passion that fueled my soul and the security that would build my future. Alistair proposed after 2 years, a classic, down on one knee affair with a perfect diamond ring. It felt like the logical next step in the life I was constructing. My parents were ecstatic. His parents welcomed me with open arms. And Jasper, my sweet, understanding Jasper, accepted it with a sad smile. He understood this was a necessary performance, a role I had to play to secure the future we'd eventually have together. Or so I told him. And myself. The prenup was my father's idea, a non-negotiable condition of him releasing my trust fund. He and his lawyers drafted it, and the terms seemed straightforward enough to my 23-year-old mind. It was a simple 10-year clause. If we divorced before our 10th anniversary, our assets would remain separate. My family money was mine, his was his. He'd walk away with what he brought in, which, at the time, was significantly less than my inheritance. But after the 10-year mark, everything we had accumulated together would be considered marital property, to be split 50-50. There was also a standard fidelity clause, a bit of legalese I barely skimmed. My parents figured 10 years was long enough to prove the marriage was legitimate, a decade to solidify a union they had essentially arranged. I saw it as a 10-year insurance policy, an escape hatch, if I ever needed it. I signed it without a second thought, seeing only protection. I never imagined it could be weaponized. The early years of my marriage to Alistair were a masterclass in compartmentalization. On the surface, we were the perfect couple. We bought a beautiful colonial house in a leafy suburb, hosted dinner parties where his colleagues would praise my ambition, and we took tasteful vacations to Italy and France. Alistair was the perfect husband, almost unnervingly so. When I decided to launch my own consulting firm, he was my biggest cheerleader. "Whatever you need, Ilara," he'd say, reviewing my business plan with his sharp financial eye. "I believe in you completely." That. When my work required me to travel, he never once complained. In fact, he encouraged it. "Go, build your empire," he'd smile, kissing me goodbye at the airport. "Don't worry about anything here. I've got it covered." What I see now, with the brutal clarity of hindsight, is that he wasn't just giving me his support. He was giving me all the rope I needed to hang myself. Every business trip became a lifeline to Jasper. A conference in Chicago was a romantic weekend in a boutique hotel. A client meeting in Boston was a long, stolen lunch in the North End. Every late night I claimed to be at the office was a chance to have uninterrupted, hours-long phone calls with him, whispering in the sterile silence of my empty workspace. Jasper had taken a job about 3 hours away, a distance that was both a curse and a blessing. It made spontaneous meetings impossible, but it also made our secret encounters feel like precious, stolen jewels. I became an expert logistics manager. I curated my lies with the same attention to detail I applied to my client proposals. I created elaborate backstories for my trips, complete with fake itineraries I'd casually leave on the kitchen counter for Alistair to see. I'd text him photos of a conference center lobby before heading out to meet Jasper. I felt a thrilling, dangerous kind of pride in my ability to manage it all. The crazy part is the guilt never came. Or perhaps I just refused to let it in. In my mind, this was a situation forced upon me. My parents had backed me into a corner, and this elaborate charade was the only way I could survive without sacrificing a part of my soul. I wasn't betraying Alistair, I was simply supplementing my life. He was getting a good wife. I ran our household flawlessly. I was a charming and supportive partner at his corporate events, and I never brought drama or emotional demands to his doorstep. He had the stability and partnership he wanted. What he didn't know, I reasoned, couldn't possibly hurt him. Alistair, for his part, played his role to perfection. He seemed utterly content. He'd get promoted, we'd celebrate with expensive champagne, and he'd toast to us and our future. He never questioned my travel schedule, never called me out on a flimsy excuse, never showed a flicker of suspicion. His trust felt absolute, and it only reinforced my belief that I was handling everything perfectly. His lack of suspicion wasn't a red flag. To me, it was a green light. It was proof that my charade was not just effective, but flawless. I mistook his patience for ignorance, his quiet support for a lack of passion. I saw him as steady, reliable, and predictable. It never once occurred to me that he was simply biding his time. By year 7, what started as a desperate balancing act had evolved into an art form. My double life ran on a parallel track to my real one, smooth and efficient, with no risk of collision. The deception was no longer a source of anxiety, but a mark of my sophistication. I was proud of my skills, of the intricate web I had woven so seamlessly that even I sometimes forgot where the lies ended and the truth began. I could be sitting on the couch next to Alistair, his arm draped casually over my shoulders as we watched a movie, while I planned a weekend getaway with Jasper on my phone, my thumbs flying across the screen under the guise of responding to urgent work emails. I had learned to compartmentalize so completely that I could be fully present in each moment, with each man, without the slightest tremor of conflict. I could laugh at Alistair's dry wit, and, minutes later, feel a pang of longing from a poetic text message from Jasper. The two worlds existed inside me, separate and distinct. The logistics had become second nature. I had a separate American Express card, one I'd told Alistair was for business expenses that I would reconcile with my company later. It paid for everything in Jasper's world: hotel suites with skyline views, fuel for the long drives to our meeting points, intimate dinners at restaurants where no one would know us, thoughtful gifts I couldn't buy on our shared accounts. Alistair, ever trusting, would just nod when he saw the bill. "Make sure you get reimbursed for all of that," he'd say. "Don't let your firm take advantage." Nah. I had a fake email account with a bland, corporate-sounding name, used exclusively for communicating with Jasper. The notifications were set to a unique, subtle vibration pattern on my phone, a silent alarm that only I could recognize. I could be in the middle of a tense negotiation for a client, or at a family dinner with Alistair's parents and know, with a secret thrill, that a message from Jasper was waiting for me. Alistair's career had taken off around this time, which only made things easier. His financial firm was expanding into international markets, and he was taking on bigger, more demanding clients. He started working longer hours, sometimes not getting home until after 9. Weekends were often interrupted by calls with London or Hong Kong. I told myself it was perfect. He was driven and focused on building his career, and I was focused on building mine. We were a modern power couple, mature enough to give each other the space and autonomy we needed to thrive. The rhythm with Jasper settled into a comfortable routine. We'd see each other every 2 or 3 weeks, a carefully orchestrated dance around my work schedule. Sometimes, during these stolen weekends, the conversation would drift into more serious territory. He'd talk about the future, about how tired he was of the secrecy, of introducing me to his friends as just my old college friend, Alara. There was a melancholy in his voice that pricked at my conscience, but I was quick to soothe it. I'd convince him, and myself, that I was protecting everyone. Alistair was spared the pain of the truth. My parents got the son-in-law they wanted. And Jasper and I got to keep our connection, pure and untainted by the messy obligations of real life. In a twisted way, I started to believe the arrangement was making me a better wife. Because I was getting my emotional and romantic needs met by Jasper, I could be more patient and understanding with Alistair. I wasn't resentful that he worked long hours or wasn't a natural romantic, because I wasn't depending on him for those things. I could appreciate his good qualities, his sharp intelligence, his unwavering reliability, his ambition without feeling frustrated by what he lacked. He seemed happy, or at least content. He bragged about my success to his friends, praised my independence. I thought we had achieved a kind of enlightened, balanced partnership. Looking back, I realized I had gotten overconfident. I had become so good at the game that I stopped looking for the trapdoors. After 8 years of successfully managing my double life, I stopped being as careful. When something feels effortless, you start to get sloppy. I'd leave my phone face up on the coffee table when Jasper texted. I'd recycle excuses for my weekend trips without remembering who I'd told what. I'd come home from a weekend with him glowing, so filled with a joy and lightness that I must have seemed like a different person. But Alistair never said a word. He never called me out on inconsistencies, never asked an uncomfortable question. His unwavering calm only reinforced my belief that my system was foolproof and he suspected nothing. What I now know is that he wasn't being oblivious, he was being methodical. He was building his case, documenting every misstep, and waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. Our 10th wedding anniversary fell on a Tuesday, a day too ordinary for such a milestone. "Let's do something special that weekend," Alistair suggested, his tone warm and affectionate. "A real celebration. Just us." He booked a weekend at a luxurious resort nestled in the mountains, the kind of place with a world-class spa, roaring fireplaces, and tasting menus at the restaurant. The entire weekend felt like a scene from a movie about a perfect marriage. Alistair was more attentive and relaxed than he had been in years. We did a wine tasting, got a couple's massage, and took long walks through the autumn foliage, holding hands. Over long candlelit dinners, we reminisced about our early relationship, laughing about our first date and the awkward meeting with my parents. He seemed so happy, so genuinely in love. On the final night, as we sat by the fire sipping brandy, he brought up the idea of finally starting a family. "We're both established now," he said, taking my hand. "Our foundation is solid. Maybe it's time to think about kids, Alara." I felt a strange mix of panic and fondness. I gave him a non-committal answer, but the sentiment felt real. I left that weekend feeling secure, content, and more than a little smug. I had made it. 10 years. Tuesday morning, the official day of our anniversary, Alistair left for work at his usual time, leaving a single red rose on my pillow. I had a client call at 9, so I was working from home. Around 10:30, the doorbell rang. I ignored it at first, assuming it was a package delivery. But it kept ringing, insistent and sharp. Annoyed, I finally went to the door. A man in a cheap-looking suit stood on my porch, holding a large manila envelope. "Are you Alara Morrison?" he asked, his face impassive. When I said yes, he thrust the envelope into my hand. "You've been served." I actually laughed, a small, confused chuckle. "I'm sorry, you must have the wrong house," I said, trying to hand it back. "My husband and I just celebrated our anniversary. Everything is fine." "No." He just shook his head and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway holding this absurd envelope. It had to be a mistake, some kind of administrative error. But when I tore it open, my hands suddenly trembling, I saw Alistair's name as the petitioner, and mine as the respondent. The filing date was that morning, October 24th. Exactly 10 years and 1 day after our wedding. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the pages, my vision blurring, irreconcilable differences. Division of assets pursuant to the prenuptial agreement dated August 15th, 10 years prior, and then I saw it, a section at the bottom that made the blood drain from my face. It was a list of evidence being submitted in support of the petition. It included photographs, phone records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, and sworn witness statements related to an ongoing extramarital affair spanning the majority of the marriage. My first reaction wasn't panic or fear, it was sheer, unadulterated confusion. Evidence? How could he have evidence? I had been so careful. How could he have been planning this while holding my hand and talking about having children just 2 days before? The cold, calculated cruelty of it was incomprehensible. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic, unanswered phone calls. I called Alistair's office, only to be told by his crisp, professional assistant that he was in back-to-back meetings and could not be reached. I called his cell phone a dozen times, each call going straight to a voicemail that sounded, for the first time, like the voice of a stranger. I sat at my kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out before me like the wreckage of a plane crash, and waited. He came home at his normal time, just after 7. He walked in, loosened his tie, and asked, "How was your day?" as if it were any other Tuesday. He glanced at the legal documents covering the table as if they were work I'd brought home, things that didn't concern him. The sheer normalcy of his behavior was terrifying. It felt like a scene from a psychological thriller. Finally, I found my voice, a choked, ragged thing. "What the hell is this, Alistair?" He looked at me, his expression calm, almost placid. "I think it's time for us to end our marriage, Alara," he said, his voice even. "I believe it's for the best." For the best?" I shrieked, standing up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You serve me with divorce papers on the day after our 10th anniversary and you think it's for the best. How long have you known about Jasper?" I demanded, expecting him to say he'd recently found a suspicious text or hired a private investigator in the last few months. He met my gaze without flinching. His calmness was the most brutal weapon he could have used. "I've known since about 6 months after you two reconnected," he said. "So, for over 8 years. The number hung in the air between us, sucking all the oxygen from the room. 8 years. 8 years of encouraging my travel. 8 years of supporting my career. 8 years of celebrating anniversaries, exchanging Christmas gifts, and sleeping in the same bed, all while knowing I was living a lie. The depth of his deception was dizzying. It dwarfed my own. "Why?" I whispered, my anger collapsing into a hollow sense of dread. "Why would you wait so long? Why would you put yourself through that?" And then he explained it, not with anger or sorrow, but with the cool, dispassionate logic of a financier explaining a long-term investment strategy. He walked me through the terms of the prenup my father had so proudly negotiated. Before our 10th anniversary, a divorce would have been clean. I would have kept my inheritance and the majority of our shared assets. But the moment the clock struck midnight on our anniversary, the 10-year clause kicked in. Everything became marital property, subject to a 50-over-50 split. "And," he added, delivering the final, devastating blow, "there's the fidelity clause. Because you were engaged in an affair for the duration of the marriage, you violated the terms, which means, according to the contract you signed, I am actually entitled to more than half. A judge will likely award me a significant portion of everything we've built together, including a claim against assets that were once considered exclusively yours. The most humiliating part wasn't the loss of the money. It was the realization of how completely and utterly I had been outplayed. All those times I thought I was being so clever, he had been 10 steps ahead, patiently collecting data. All those weekends, I thought I was successfully managing my secret life. He was gathering evidence. I had been playing checkers, moving my pieces one square at a time, celebrating small victories. He had been playing chess, sacrificing pawns and positioning his queen for a checkmate he saw coming years in advance. I had lost a game I didn't even know we were playing. The days that followed were a chaotic descent into a legal and emotional hellscape. I hired the best divorce attorney my dwindling, soon-to-be contested funds could afford. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who reviewed the evidence Alistair's team had submitted and delivered the verdict with brutal honesty. "Alara, you don't have a case," she said, her tone leaving no room for false hope. "The evidence is comprehensive and damning. The prenup is ironclad. What made it so much worse was seeing the extent of Alistair's meticulous documentation. He had everything. Photos of Jasper and me leaving a restaurant in Boston taken by a private investigator. Copies of my business credit card statements with charges from boutique hotels and romantic restaurants that clearly didn't match my claimed expense reports. Phone records showing thousands of calls and texts to a number not associated with any of my legitimate business contacts. He even had a sworn statement from a former colleague of mine who had grown suspicious of my frequent girls' trips. He had spent years building an airtight cage around me, and I had willingly, happily walked right into it. My parents' reaction was somehow worse than the legal devastation. When I finally worked up the courage to call them, my voice cracking as I explained the situation, my mother's first question was a cold, clinical, "Are the allegations true?" When I admitted that yes, I had been seeing Jasper throughout my marriage, there was a long, heavy silence on the line. Then my father's voice, thick with a disappointment that felt more painful than anger, came through. "We trusted you to make mature decisions, Alara. We are deeply, deeply disappointed. We're going to need some time." The line went dead, and with it, the last shred of my support system. Roman's reaction was just as complicated, and just as painful. When I told him what was happening, that Alistair had known about us all along, and had been documenting our lives, he was quiet for a long time. His first question wasn't about us, or my well-being. It was, "Why didn't you tell me we were being investigated?" I tried to explain that I hadn't known, but the accusation lingered in the air. He pointed out rightly that this put him in a terrible position, both professionally and socially. Then he asked the questions I had been avoiding for nearly a decade, the ones I wasn't prepared to answer. "Did you ever actually intend to leave him for me, Alara? Or was I just a way to make your marriage more tolerable?" When I hesitated, unable to give him a clear, honest answer, I heard something shift in his voice. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cool distance. "I think I need some space," he said. "I need to figure out how I feel about all of this." The practical implications hit me like a series of aftershocks. Alistair moved out within a week into a sleek, furnished apartment downtown. I was left alone in the house we had bought together, its empty rooms echoing with my failures. A house I now couldn't afford to maintain on my own. My business, once my source of pride and independence, began to suffer. I was distracted, emotional, and unreliable. Word of my messy divorce spread quickly through our professional network, and clients started to question my judgment. The free fall had begun, and there was nothing to break my fall. 18 months later, the dust has settled, but it has buried me. I live in a one-bedroom apartment across town, in a less fashionable neighborhood. The colonial house was sold as part of the settlement. My consulting business fell apart completely. No one wants to hire a strategist whose own life strategy ended in such a spectacular implosion. I do freelance work now, piecing together enough to pay my rent, constantly feeling the financial pressure I once thought I was immune to. The divorce was finalized 8 months ago. Alistair walked away with the house, most of our shared assets, and a settlement that effectively reset my financial situation to where I was at 25. He moved on with a speed that was both impressive and soul-crushing. Through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, I hear he's dating a woman he met at his firm. She's younger, an architect, and apparently, she's everything I pretended to be, but never was. She's completely focused on him, honest about her feelings, and genuinely invested in building a life together, not keeping one foot out the door. People mention how happy he seems, how relaxed and confident he is in a way he never was with me. He won. Jasper and I tried to make it work for a few months after the initial shock wore off. We tried to build something real out of the wreckage. But the foundation of our relationship had been the thrill of the forbidden, the electricity of secrecy. Without that dynamic, we were just two people whose connection had been forged in deception and convenience, not genuine compatibility. The reality of dating the mundane arguments, the need for real compromise felt foreign and uncomfortable. Eventually, he started seeing someone else. I couldn't even be angry. Our entire relationship had been predicated on the fact that we were both with other people. My parents and I are slowly, awkwardly, rebuilding our relationship. They help me out financially when I'm truly desperate, but every check comes with an unspoken lecture. Their disappointment hangs in the air between us, a permanent filter on every conversation. They had trusted me to be the sensible daughter they raised, and I had proven that I was still the same impulsive girl who chose immediate gratification over long-term wisdom. But the hardest part, The thought that keeps me awake in the lonely silence of my new apartment is accepting that Alistair was smarter than me in every way that mattered. While I was congratulating myself on my cleverness, on managing 2 lives, he was thinking 10 steps ahead, patiently positioning himself to come out on top, no matter what I did. While I was focused on the fleeting pleasure of a stolen weekend, he was building a case that would grant him both justice and freedom. I keep trying to find ways to paint him as the villain, to focus on the cold calculation of his actions. And he was calculating. He pretended to be a loving husband for 8 years, while secretly planning my financial and social destruction. But the raw, unbearable truth is that every choice was mine. I chose to marry a man I didn't love. I chose to lie to him, every single day, for a decade. I chose convenience and security over the difficult, honest work of building a real life. Alistair didn't force me to do any of it. He just made sure that when the consequences finally arrived, they would be real and they would be absolute. He got everything he wanted. 10 years of wifely support while he built his career and established himself financially. The moral high ground when the marriage ended, making it easy for him to move on. A financial settlement that set him up for life. And he got rid of a wife who was never truly invested in their marriage without ever having to be the bad guy. People call him strategic, admirable even, for how he handled it. But from where I stand, he was lying to me just as much as I was lying to him. I lied because I was a coward, trying to avoid hurting people while holding on to 2 different lives I wanted. He lied because he was setting a trap, waiting for the perfect moment to spring it for maximum financial and personal leverage. But in the end, none of that changes where I am now. I'm 31, starting over from scratch. I'm supposed to say that I've learned my lesson, that I've grown as a person. But honestly, I think I just learned that I'm not as smart as I thought I was, and that some people play for keeps. The idea that love and honesty always win feels like a fairy tale. Alistair won because he was smarter and more ruthless, not because he was more virtuous. Maybe that makes me the villain of this story. But I'm tired of pretending that anyone's motives were pure. We all made choices based on what we wanted and what we thought we could get away with. The only difference is, his choices worked out. Mine didn't. That doesn't make him a better person. It just makes him a smarter player.